background. I have done the 504 job of the district before I came to the service center. And so that for me was baptism by fire. Like I took the 504 job at the district level because I knew dyslexia. And those two things, y'all remember back in the day when those went hand in hand? Yes. And so I knew dyslexia. I did not know 504. And literally day one, I'm like at my desk crying. Like, what have I done? Called Region 7 of all things and asked somebody to come sit with me when I got through crying. And she's now my boss. Like a year later, she hired me. So she taught me lots of 504 things. And then I have access to some fabulous training. And so I've become the person at Region 7 really that trains on Section 504.
Can I jump in real
absolutely.
quick? Sorry, because I have to leave. And I forgot to tell you why I'm even here. Because I have been entering college board accommodations and haphazardly have just come across a lot of inconsistencies in either like missing, like we say this kid has hearing loss, but we have no documentation at all, or this kid has blah, 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 and there's no, and 1 year the kid had hearing loss and then they lost the hearing loss and then they came back to the high school and now they have it again. And so when I'm entering official documentation, and I know this is far removed from some of you, if you're at the elementary campus, but eventually those kids are typically going to have plans throughout. And by the time they get to the high school and I'm having to fill out official paperwork for College Board asks me some really detailed things. And I have to answer yes or no. If I say no, then it says other documentation required. And then I have to upload either whatever the committee has collected as documentation, whether it's a doctor's note or parent input or whatever it is. And if I don't have that, I've had 2 this year that were denied. And so she's going to talk a lot about what that documentation can be. It doesn't have to be that we've got to do full-blown testing, but we just have to know that whatever campus we're on, yes, we know that even based on suspicion, a kid can have a 504 plan, but the committee's got to come together and say, what documentation do we need? Anyway, she'll go over all that.
Yeah.
But that is really kind of how I got into this because, bless it, Hilda and Valerie are sending me, accommodation things, and I'm going, and so me going into Success Ed and just clicking on a kid's name and looking, what is their disability so I can put it in? Sometimes I'm on a kid for like 30, 40 minutes just trying to figure out what is it they even have a plan for because it's just not necessarily clear. So anyway, that's kind of why I'm even here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of districts that ask me to come in and visit with the folks that do 504 in the district, and a lot of times it's the counselors, sometimes it's the APs as well, but it's for consistency. So we can build consistency campus to campus, but also person to person because there's different reasons you would pull 504 information for a kiddo, and consistency can be helpful. And this is the full day presentation. Today we're pretty much staying on those top 2 bullets, but if you want to talk about the other bullets, we absolutely can. I just left all the slides in there because maybe like you handle lots of MDRs and you just want those resources. I'm a heavy linker, I say. So lots of my resources are directly linked in the slides. And so I just left everything in there. So this comes from that document. Around COVID, a little bit before COVID, I think TEA put together this document. So first, no, there is no state regulation of Section 504. So it's a federal requirement, and the Office for Civil Rights oversees it federally. So states have like monitoring. So a state education agency would go monitor districts and how they're doing 504. We don't have that in Texas. But around 2019, 2020, TEA developed a video. It's a brief video, and I think it's still up. The last time I looked, it was still up, and it's not invaluable. Really nothing has changed in 504 from the OCR perspective for requirements, so it's still valid. And then they developed this document to kind of be a companion document with it. They've updated it a couple of times, and what they're doing is they're just curating all the little pieces of guidance we have from OCR. Really nothing per the state, but it is, there's some federal stuff they can pull from, and then they threw in some best practices and some examples. So the document's really grown. I like it. And so when I can, I cite the document because what worked for me in my district really is just not helpful for you if we actually have state guidance around it. And let's just point to what TEA says that the federal government says. So every district has to have a 504 coordinator at the district level if they are so large. So you know that somewhere in your district you have a 504 coordinator. My guess is that Amy or Lisa is the designated 504 coordinator for your district, named on the website.
Well, there's
know.
about
It's
3
not
of
me.
us doing it right now. It's really going to be Melanie
Melanie
Cowan,
Cowan.
who's
Oh,
our
okay.
new SPED director.
Okay.
But since she's new, we're all kind of trying to help right now.
All right. I'm going to move past the data. What the data shows, and you can go back and look at it if you're interested, but I've got 504 and SPED color-coded. What it shows us is that it feels surprising, I bet, to you. I know it did to me when I was in a district, but 504 is actually not growing a whole lot. SPED is growing, right, because of child fine violations from about 2018. Texas is finding more and more kids eligible under special education, and then all our kids in dyslexia being offered an evaluation under special education if they were receiving services. So basically exiting 504 and entering special education. So basically this data just shows us that 504 is actually shrinking, right, percentage-wise over the whole state, and then also in just Region 7. So I pulled both data points. I know you've got more meetings than you can say grace over. The one data point I would stop and talk about is like 25% of our kids, this is in Region 7 schools, we have 101, have a plan. They either have an IEP or they have a 504 plan. And so I understand that meeting fatigue is real, right? Because those teachers and you guys and your administrators, for 25% of your enrolled population, roughly, you're sitting in an ARC meeting or a 504 meeting, and maybe on top of that, LPACs, for a kiddo every year. I'm going to move past some of this. I told you I wanted to leave it in there for you so you can go back to it if you're interested. So I want to show you the difference in 504 and special education. I think we often use special education to frame what 504 is, and that's actually accurate because there are several times that OCR says, hey, we're not telling you exactly the process to do this thing called 504, so when in doubt, just do the same thing you would do in SPED, right? Which can be very restrictive and time consuming. We don't have to do that thing, but OCR says clearly fulfilling SPED requirements is one way to fulfill 504 requirements. But they aren't exactly the same, so let's look at the differences. And this top statement comes from OCR's Parent and Educator Guide. I like this document. It's not quite as user-friendly as the state document, but OCR says, look, this is an indicator to parents what they can expect of you, districts. And this is an indicator to you, districts, of what you should be providing and how you should be communicating information to parents. And so in that document, they tell us basically what 504 is in a sentence. And then I pulled a sentence out of the Code of Federal Regulations that is part of our SPED law. And it tells us what special education is. And so the first thing I always like to do is remove all the words except those two phrases that show us the difference between 504 and SPED. And so 504 is there to protect against discrimination. We've heard it called leveling the playing field. We've heard it called lots of things, right? But basically what we're doing is not discriminating against a kiddo based on disability. And special education goes a step further. So kids in SPED have all the rights of 504, but they're also entitled to those three words. That's specially designed instruction. And for parents or even school staff that are having a hard time with what exactly is specially designed instruction, I say it's an IEP goal. Basically, that's what it is. So if a kid needs an IEP goal, they need specially designed instruction, assuming they meet the eligibility for it. If they just need accommodations based on their disability, they don't actually need a goal in the instruction that goes with it, then that sounds more like 504. So 504, we're not going to discriminate. And truly, y'all, we are providing accommodations that just, probably wouldn't say it exactly this way to a parent, but basically we're just barely rising above that threshold of not discriminating. Because in 504, we deliver a free, appropriate public education. And so we are very concerned with exactly what that kid needs to have equal access. We are not there in 504 to maximize Johnny's performance, make Johnny the best Johnny he can be. And I know every parent will love a copy of class notes. And maybe Johnny wants a copy of class notes, but he's not entitled to a copy of class notes just because he's in 504. And so what we want to do at all Pine Tree schools is what's best for Johnny, right? That is like a gen ed goal, I guess, at least at every district. And I actually attended Pine Tree. Every district I was a part of, that was communicated, whether I was the student or an employee. We want what's best for our kids. But when we sit down in a 504 or an ARD meeting, we are not there to make decisions about what's best for kids. And frankly, I tried to teach myself to quit saying those words and to teach my staff to quit saying those words, because I don't want to accidentally promise to parents that we are at this table right now as this properly constituted 504 committee to do what's best for your kid. Right, we're doing that with all the kids as a part of Gen Ed. Right now, we're talking about your kiddo, the disability, how it's manifesting, the data that supports, eligibility for 504, and those accommodations that are required. So nothing says in any regulations that you can't say you're there to do what's best for the kid, but I'm really cautious about that. I'm a parent of a kid with a disability, and I just think it's easy to misinterpret what staff members say, especially if the language is unfamiliar to you. And you might just take that statement at face value. And so I do kind of like to share that. I'll put both those statements back on the screen, and I'll show you the overlap. So let's remove all the words except where that overlap is. Where's the overlap? Disability. Yeah, and that's what's so confusing. So I'll show you my circles. I wish these were my idea. They're not. Dave Richards showed me this. It was the first legal training I went to when I became the 504 coordinator in a district. And this visual stuck. So let's talk about that overlapping category of disability. So all the kids that come into the yellow circle have eligibility requirements. They have to finish the grade level before. Their parents have to enroll them. They have to be, they have to meet whatever the eligibility criteria is for entrance into that classroom or school. But within that all-student circle is this slightly smaller circle called Section 504. And so the kids that fit in that red circle, of course, have all the rights and privileges of the yellow circle, but they have a disability. And their disability rises to a certain threshold. And this committee has come together. We're going to have just the right people at the table. And they've decided, sure enough, that disability rises to this certain threshold. But they still have all the rights and the privileges of the yellow circle. Smaller circle within the red circle, those are our kids served through SPED. And so the same disability potentially could get you in the blue circle or the red circle, right? And that's where I think we get confused. I know I did before I came into the 504 world. The thing to remember about that smaller blue circle is we've got the 13 disabilities, right? That's all we've got. And so we also have to have an adverse impact on education to get in the blue circle. Remember that, an adverse impact on education, not learning, just education. It's a little bit broader. And then we have to have a need for specially designed instruction. Remember, those were the 3 words we saw at the bottom of the screen earlier. We have to need an IEP goal. But the kids in the blue circle have the rights and privileges of the kids in the red circle. And so more and more, I hear of, I don't know all the things that go on in all of the United States, but I do attend quite a few legal trainings. I hear more and more parents suing districts under Section 504 because they can get money. So they can get monetary damages, whereas under SPED, you don't typically get that. You get compensatory services. And so we don't ever want to completely separate those two, because we know that all kids in 504, they don't have the rights of SPED, but the kids in SPED have the rights and protections under 504. So here in the blue circle, we got to be really careful not to discriminate against them as well. We would never have 2 plans. OCR tells us that. They have kind of a living FAQ document. And they tell us, yeah, these kids have the privileges, protections, whatever, of the 504 kids, but don't make 2 plans. This IEP for the SPED kids swallows up the 504 plan. And that gets confusing sometimes, depending on the disability. And it's still here in districts. A nurse might think a kiddo with asthma with an individualized health care plan needs a 504 for that, but he needs a SPED plan and IEP for his dyslexia. Now, the one plan, swallows up the other one, basically. When we ask ourselves as a committee about eligibility for Section 504, we ask ourselves about major life activities, right? Here in SPED, we're very concerned with learning. Remember, we have to have an adverse impact to education or learning to get into the blue circle. But up here in the red circle, any potential major life activity can be impacted. So I'm always thinking from a place of compliance. I'm a diagnostician, and so we're very black and white. And we think in terms of do not ever say this. Do not let people on your team say this. And also always do this because, right, it's part of the compliance. So I'm always thinking of the don't ever say. One of the things we don't ever want to say is we don't see an adverse impact on education when we're talking about 504. There doesn't have to be an adverse impact on education. We may never see at school a kiddo's major life activity impacted. Someone sued, I heard Dave Richard talk about the kiddo who had the major life activity of reproduction impacted. I don't know the story behind that, but I'm talking any major life activity, y'all, potentially could make you eligible for a 504 plan, right? So we don't have to have an adverse impact on learning to be in 504. In fact, I would caution you, if it seems like that's the major life activity that's impacted, this kid is struggling to learn, we should consider whether he should be referred for an IDEA or special education evaluation. Because that feels very much like child find has been triggered. We suspect the kid has a disability. We suspect there's an adverse impact on education. If we suspect he needs an IEP, he belongs in a referral for the Blue Circle. Those other major life activities like walking and talking and breathing and concentrating and all the bodily systems like the respiratory system, the excretory system, all of those are covered basically under ADA, that Americans with Disabilities Act. And Section 504 is a sister act. So you can look for your major life activities list in the ADA. It's been revised. It's now the ADAAA. I think there's 3 A's after it because it's a revised amendment act. I don't remember why I did it twice, and it was probably not on purpose. So I like to kind of frame out, imagine you're new to 504. I realize all of you in the room might not be, but I like to presume nothing because that's what I needed when I came to 504. So I like to frame what a 504 evaluation really is because this word evaluation means something very different in 504 than it means in special education, right? So a diagnostician, I think about an eval as I'm getting my test kits together, right? I'm getting my Whitcock Johnson and my Whisk. We're sitting in the broom closet at the little table, setting up my easel, I'm flipping, I'm making notes, right? That's not what a 504 evaluation is. It is basically just reviewing student data. And it's pretty much the data you've already got. And frankly, it should be thorough. You should, when I look at TEA's list, they do have a list in that document, and I have a snip of it here. It's every single piece of information you might ever have on the kid. Really, we should review all of that in committee. So we've got to get the right people to the table, looking at the data, which we probably already have. And then we ask and reach consensus on these eligibility questions. That's really all a 504 evaluation is. And so the way my staff referred to it was a 504 meeting. They said we're going to a 504 meeting. And I really tried to change that language to, are we going to a 504 evaluation, or are we getting together to have a 504 annual review or a 504 re-eval? And that helps all of us at the table realize what the stakes are. The stakes are we're determining eligibility, if it's an evaluation or a re-eval. Sorry, I've been talking a lot the past few weeks, and so my voice goes very quickly. Or is this like an annual or some sort of review where we're looking at just revising an accommodation plan? But I think that's helpful to use the actual language, either of the regulation or frankly of our forms. This is what your forms will say on them. Or in Success Ed, I understand it's not a paper form. I'm dating myself. I started with paper forms. Child find applies, so it is up to us as a district to identify, locate, evaluate. In other words, we identify all the kids that might need what we have to offer in SPED or 504, either one. And then we locate them. Where are they? So in special education, we even have to go into the home, the private schools, the doctor's offices, all of that. A little different in 504. 504 is for kids that come to school here. And then we evaluate them. But Child Find still applies both for 504 and SPED. So these are the steps. We have a suspicion. So we look around at a kid, and I'll show you Kenny in just a second, and something triggers a suspicion that a kid has a disability. We don't have to know the kid has a disability. We are not supposed to wait on somebody to tell us he has a disability. And then we make a referral. So you have a district process around a referral. So whatever that looks like in your district, we make that referral, and then we have to get parental consent. When we get parental consent for the evaluation, we offer parents procedural safeguards. And I got a call from a district just last week. I don't get this call very often anymore, but she was She was trying to figure out how to give parents for a 504 eval the SPED procedural safeguards, right? SPED procedural safeguards are a book. 504 are like 2 pages, and she was trying to figure out how to like cross out what didn't apply, right? So your procedural safeguards may be housed somewhere on district software, but for sure they're in your Success Ed system. And it's important that parents understand, what they are, because at some point, if the committee doesn't reach consensus, the parent has to execute those procedural safeguards. I mean, that's what it comes down to. We don't give in to parents because they want something for their kiddo. We have to come to a committee consensus, and ultimately, we are the educational experts, so it may be that we come to an agreement or consensus as a committee, the parent disagrees, and so to take any action, they're going to have to pursue those procedural safeguards, right? Their right to express a grievance. You'll have a local policy around that. There will be a grievance policy buried within that. I want to go back to Kenny for just a second. So I just highlighted some things about Kenny. You don't have to read all about him. Kenny was a real kid in my district, but just read the yellow part. Kenny was in junior high. And I like to remind especially administrators, I feel like counselors, at least at the districts I've been in, have a finger more on the pulse of the whole kid. But sometimes at a large junior high or high school, the same person would not have all these pieces of information. And it's up to us as the district to execute our child find responsibility. So what I'm saying is, if all this information is somewhere within our district, we're supposed to execute that referral. And it may be that the AP has some of the information, the teacher has some, the parent has some, a counselor has some, right? A doctor, this kiddo's personal doctor has some. But we're supposed to be on the lookout for all these little pieces, and we're supposed to put this together so that we can refer Kenny for an evaluation. So, I apologize for my teams popping up. You're not going to see anything confidential, I promise. It's just going to be annoying for a second. The kiddo was identified with, was it ODD right here? Yeah. So it might be frustrating when parent mentions that to someone besides you. It'd be great if you knew that, right? But if we can make our staff aware that, hey, if parent happens to say, kiddo's going to be taking some medicine from now on, the nurse is going to give it to him, how do I find the nurse and what all do I need? We've got to remember that's a child find trigger. Or if parent casually mentions that kiddo has an identification, someone needs to follow through on that. When we put all the pieces together, it's a little clearer that child find was triggered for Kenny. So step 4 is we got to schedule a meeting, right? So we start gathering these pieces of data, and I bet that's your job, right? Is to gather the pieces of data, and they may come like in a manila envelope, or they may live in the webosphere somewhere, but someone's gathering those. And then at the meeting, we've got these 3 folks. TEA gives us these roles, but I encourage staff to be sure who your 504 coordinator says can fulfill these roles. I came from a district where the person making placement decisions was never the counselor. That was just my district's decision. They said there will always be a principal or an assistant principal there. Because in our district, a counselor could not basically secure funds or make placement decisions. And that was the district I was in. Clearly, TEA says some counselors might be equipped to sit as this member who can make placement decisions, right? But that's why we have a 504 coordinator for the district, is so that some decisions can be made. Because all of the procedures are not crystal clear, we get to choose how to do some of our procedures. And so there's the one person that the district is supposed to name, or a handful of people, but on the website it would be listed probably as one person, so that you know who to go to get clarity on your procedures. So this person has knowledge of like the decisions that can be made, what the placement options are, and then somebody has to know the kid. And frankly, there's going to be overlap. If you invite parents to your meetings, and I bet you do, then that parent knows the kid. And if that parent happens to be a teacher or an administrator, maybe they also know the placement, right? And then somebody has to know the evaluation data. And again, if you've got a teacher who knows the student, there's overlap. The teacher knows the data, the learning data for sure on the kiddo. The nurse might know the health data, but also know the kid, right? I had a district ask me once, well, could we have a committee of 2? Like if someone has 2 of these knowledges, could we have a committee of 2? And I heard a lawyer say, I've never heard of a committee of 2. That sounds more like a partnership or a duo. So I came from a district that we needed 3 or more. Again, your district kind of makes those determinations. But I do want you to understand that part of the kiddo's procedural safeguards and part of the kid's rights is the process. So we don't deviate from the process, and we think carefully about the process because that process is where the kid's rights basically are.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And you may get to this. As far as documentation on this, is it necessary, do we need to document all the ways that that person knows that student? Like, or if we have one in each category and say the teacher may know evaluation data and the student and just put them if they know the student.
Yeah, I'll give you my thoughts on that, and then I'll let your team answer. So for me, when I managed 504, I thought, I want to prove we're doing all the things, and I want to prove we're doing even all the extra things. And so we had a sign-in sheet, and we let folks check the boxes that applied to them. So my teacher could check knowledge of student, knowledge of evaluation data. Nothing keeps that person from being able to check both of those boxes. So as long as your team understands what they're saying, and all they're saying is they have knowledge in those areas, I don't see a problem with that. Did y'all want to answer that?
Yeah, I think that's good.
I mean, it makes sense to me that if you're doing something, to go ahead and basically give yourself credit for that.
And we talked when we were at the Region 7 for this training, like we were thinking of a kid with, a parent comes in and says, my kid's got ADHD, but we don't really, maybe we don't even see it, but it might be that the nurse is invited because she knows the kid's taking the medication in her office every day, whatever, because it may not be manifesting itself and even getting in the way of a kid at school, but the nurse knows because she's administering it, medication. So, or even input from the school nurse on a kid like that.
Yeah. I think that is the most flexible role. I feel like in most districts, this is pretty static because the district decides who's sitting in this position, right? Whether it's the AP principal, whatever. And then this is pretty static usually too. Districts decide whether they're going to invite parents. If you choose to invite parents, you should invite all parents, right? We can't just invite the easy parents and not invite the hard parents. And TEA does encourage us to invite parents even though they're not required members. And so this is typically sort of established by districts or at least campuses. But over here, whoever's completing the invitation needs to really think about that. Who do I want there ready to interpret that data? Because you don't want to be me. You don't want to be in the uncomfortable position of trying to interpret data that you're not equipped to interpret. Does that make sense? Like if you forgot to invite the nurse and this is a kid with epilepsy, like I don't want to be the person trying to interpret that data when mom shows up with a new healthcare plan from the doctor or just with information from the doctor, right? So it makes sense that we think about that kiddo's disability and then how it's manifesting, even if it's just a suspected, impairment. Parents just kind of told us a little bit about it. And I understand that you might not have access to a DIAG or a school psychologist. In most districts, those are paid out of SPED funds. And they're not giving you access to that person, that staff member, for gen ed purposes. And 504 is gen ed. If you're not in SPED, you're in gen ed, right? And that would violate the use of funds. And so it would be great if we had access to their expertise. But the truth is you may not have access to their expertise. If they're split funded, there's no problem, right? There's no 504 reason you can't have a DIAG or you can't have that LSSP, but there may be the budgetary reason. So then we get the committee together and we think about all the data we have access to. So here's Kenny again, and I'll give you a second to look at what's in yellow. I still think, even with whether it's Kenny or a kiddo with epilepsy, there's some data that's static and we should get it every time. And then there's some data that's specific perhaps to this kid that we would want just based on the symptoms we're seeing or the manifestations. So what data should we get? What data are you used to gathering for your 504 meetings, for Kenny or anybody else?
Teacher input.
From
Teachers.
All the teachers, yes.
The ones that read their emails.
The ones that read.
Yeah, the ones that'll actually respond.
Yes.
Yes.
And the nurse.
And the nurse.
For some of them.
Yeah, if there's like an M
Mhm.
code, the.
Is it the medical alert?
The
Yeah.
medical code on their Skylar, we always include the nurse.
Good.
Of course, every kid in our school has asthma, so you know,
Mhm.
she's awfully busy.
Oh, I bet she is. They all got that inhaler in the drawer that, I don't know, for some kids haven't been used.
I
like,
haven't
since
used
third
our
grade.
Hagler in 10,000 years,
Yeah.
but we still have it.
And parents, do you get an input form from parents? Or maybe you invite parents and you listen to them at the meeting?
Yeah, we
When
have
they
it.
come.
Yeah. Either works. It's unusual,
The initial,
initial.
I'll send have the parent input.
And then we invite them to the meeting and listen. And so there's nothing wrong with capturing information over the phone, right there in the meeting. I will say this, again, diag brain, if a parent says it, I really try to capture it. So if a parent, and again, this is just best practice, y'all, I'm deviating a little bit from 504, but I think you'll agree with me. If a parent expresses a concern, I want to write down that a parent expressed concern, but I wouldn't leave it there. In my deliberations, I would always write that the district responded to the parent's concern. I would not want to leave that concern hanging in the deliberations, if you will, because let's just say we need to go back and pull that for an OCR complaint or even our internal records review and have it look like we didn't respond. I really want to put that whoever in the meeting, and you can, I don't see a problem with naming them by name or going back to their role in the meeting, answered the parent's concern, maybe even with the class schedule. So per the class schedule, Ms. So-and-so answered parent's concern that student was not having access to PE or fine arts. I would always want to, basically, if we're doing it, I want to give myself credit for it, which means we've got to write it down. We've got to document it.
So a question on
Yeah.
that, is that okay to send, in the notes down at the bottom? You address the concern in the meeting, but then send it out, but then document it down at the bottom.
Yeah, I
You
mean-
Send an email to the teachers addressing.
Yeah, so imagine this, and then again, I'll let your supervisors speak to this as well. I always imagine myself on the witness stand. Again, it's a diagram. I imagine someone's going to argue with me about my evaluation or the IEP development, and the due process judge is saying, Ms. Perkins, why did you choose whatever? So I'm imagining that there's been a complaint, and I'm gathering all these pieces of data. Yes, I want the email that went out to teachers or whoever touched that kiddo basically in their scheduled day. But then I also want the paperwork to reflect what happened in the meeting, the minutes, if you take minutes. Minutes aren't required. I think they're a good idea. We should not try to make a transcript of them because sometimes we can, shoot ourselves in the foot by basically contradicting something we said earlier. But for sure, we want to capture the important things that were said and the parents' concerns, or if they come in singing our praises, that's awesome too. If your student attends your meeting or offers any kind of input, then even to a teacher, if a teacher says, hey, dude, why are you not putting your earbuds in and listening to your text to speech? And the kid responds, well, I want to put that in the 504. I want to document whatever I can when I've reached out to a student or a parent. Do y'all want to add anything to taking deliberations?
So what I would say to Jacqueline is, if you're going to say email teachers about something that the parent was concerned, then that's what I would note in the deliberation,
Yeah.
is that counselor will email students, teachers concerning parents' concern about blah, blah, blah. And then maybe even put the date that we'll email by such and such date so that, and keep the email.
And remember that that's, fair game in a records request. And so I've, again, been in the unfortunate situation where some teachers emailed some things that were fairly negative about a student, and the parent requested basically it's all the records with that kid's name or TSDS number. And so a parent would never have known because it was just in school email between two teachers, except she requested. And then that can just cause mistrust, I guess. And then the other thing is, and this would be something for y'all to visit with, I guess, outside of today, but sometimes teachers, and I've been a junior high teacher, I understand the frustration, but they will put things on their input forms that I have no intention of reading out loud to parents, like kid is just lazy and won't try. But if we introduce it in the meeting, or we collect it as part of the data, then it truly is also a part of that records. It would be fair game for a records request. So I just think it's going to happen, and so you might think ahead of time about how to deal with it.
Is it okay from a legal standpoint, if they do put something distasteful like that, can we worded in the 504, unmotivated or something?
Yeah,
Does that
I'll
work
let your
with it?
supervisors answer that.
I would think you could. I mean, I don't know the legalities of
Yeah.
it.
Well, there's nothing illegal about saying negative things about a kid.
No,
you know?
but I'm
Right.
saying, so if the
Just-
teacher said that Lisa is so lazy in class and never
Right.
blah, 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 and so unmotivated.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same, but it's not as derogatory or
Yeah.
negative.
'Cause I learned that
Yeah.
one the hard ways, but, I mean, I read verbatim what the
Uh-huh.
teacher read, and I went, oh my God, I'm never gonna do that again.
You just started reading out loud
Yeah.
with your voice before your eyes caught up with what was on the paper.
Well, I mean, I had read it before, and I'm like, God, this is negative.
Yeah.
But, you know, I felt
Yeah.
legally bound to read
Yeah,
it,
I
and
see.
then when it just went, yeah.
So my thoughts would be, if I'm holding, in our district, our forms were blue, I'm holding that blue teacher input form, and it says verbatim something pretty negative about the kid, and I choose to paraphrase with some phrases like unmotivated, I think I still have to make the decision, does that blue piece of paper go into that collection of data for that meeting? Right, so I mean, I know it's hard to find time to do this, but I really should have reviewed that earlier before I got to the meeting.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to give the teacher the opportunity to revise
Reword
that.
it.
Because I don't want to be in the uncomfortable position of not including teacher data because I asked for it. So but I don't want to put it in there because I just don't want to put my district in a difficult position. So I'm not saying it's hard to say the right way to do the wrong thing. So we really just want the teacher not to write something quite so negative. But I'm just saying it's probably going to happen eventually if you stay in this business long enough. And so you might think about how to handle it ahead of time. This is the kind of data that TEA says we should gather. And you know what you'll see is it's pretty much existing data unless the parents bring in us something. So if it's a medical condition or an outside evaluation, you know, if a parent goes to Dr. Big Brains and says, I really think my kid has, what is the one that I always, an auditory processing disorder. So that's not covered, if you will, under special education. But you'll find a doctor that'll say that's what that kid has. And so then parent, you know, is kind of waving their paperwork. Well, parent, we would appreciate you sharing anything you're willing to share with us, and we will thoughtfully consider, that's the phrase I use. I heard a lawyer say it once, thoughtfully consider that once we're in committee. So we can't reject it. Now, that is illegal. We don't reject what parents want to share with the committee. We are required to thoughtfully consider it. We also aren't required to adhere to it. So if a doctor says a kid definitely needs, and then a laundry list of accommodations, we appreciate what the doctor has to share. We're going to talk about it and thoughtfully consider it in committee. But other than that, most of what you see up here, we should have access to. I like the idea of observations, especially if I've been in this position, maybe you have too, you feel like a kid has been referred and almost nobody in the district sees a need for services, for accommodations. Maybe they don't even see the suspicion of a disability, but parent insists. And I have found that most parents, by and large, think that if their kiddo has an identified disability, they're eligible for something. And they're not. That's just prong one, right? So if they have a disability, then we conduct, you know, the rest of the evaluation. But if we can observe and have good, strong data that kiddo was, I don't know, on task, all 4 of 5 minutes, as we observed, compared to typically developing peer who was only on task 3 out of the 5 minutes. You know, whatever data you can put to that can be helpful. And if the concern is more behavioral or something else, you know, you would conduct an appropriate observation. I understand that it's hard to find time to do an observation. I just think that might be an untapped tool. If we have a kiddo being referred and we just don't have data to support, the kid needs something from us as a district. Thoughts about any of the data?
Thank you for being here.
Yes, you're welcome, Amy. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, usually, because where I'm at in 5th and 6th grade campus, I get a lot of parents who, especially when they start failing math, or my kids needs a 504
Sure.
plan. And I request, okay, do you have a doctor's, and then, or do you have, go by the doctor, give me the form and we can look at that. But I also ask the teachers, what are you seeing in the classroom? And then I'll look at like their grades, are they failing? And usually we kind of put them in our RTI process first to kind of see, you know, if we can help them, if it's something that we can adjust. And we usually get the parents on board, but sometimes some of them just insist. So that's when I request, I said, well, then can I have your doctor's evaluation?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with asking. In fact, we should ask for school health records. I'm sorry, outside independent health records. We have to be cautious, and I'm not saying that's what goes on in this district, but I've heard the teachers say this. We can't do a 504 evaluation until you take your kid to the doctor and get that, you know, whatever form, that ADHD or OHI form that says he has ADHD. Because when we require, whatever we require of the
Yeah.
parent, we're bound to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
But if parent suspects a disability or says they suspect a disability, we absolutely should invite them to share whatever they're willing to share with us. In fact, I've gone so far, I had a kiddo once with anxiety and a she had a mobility issue. I can't remember what it was, something with her legs, some mobility issue. And parents said she needed homebound services. And she came back with a form from the doctor saying the kiddo was expected to be out of school for 4 or more non-consecutive weeks for this mobility issue. And I just had a suspicion. I said, can I visit with your doctor? So she gave me consent. She basically told the doctor it was fine to talk to me. I ended up talking to the nurse, and the nurse said, girl, we just put down whatever on that form that parent wanted to. The kid had some anxiety around school, and she basically pestered the doctor until he filled out that form kind of the way she wanted him to. He left the parts blank that are actually very pertinent, but I'm just saying, yes, have them share what they will with you, but also I wouldn't be afraid to ask for consent to visit with a medical provider, and the parent may not let you, which is fine, but there's nothing wrong with requesting that. And then outside of that, yeah, data. My kids, I had 4 kids go through the same school. Biology was hard for all of them. They didn't even have all the same biology teacher. It was just hard. And it was, you know, hard kind of for all the 9th graders. It was just hard. And so this is a comparison law. We are comparing this kid with a suspected disability to typically developing peers. And so you really have to start from a mindset of, yep, I see this kid is struggling, but how are the other kids struggling that don't have a suspected disability? And you know, you can look at grade averages, you can look at absences, you can look at discipline referrals. Because just because one kid is struggling doesn't mean that kid is struggling for a disability reason.
So if we have a child, because we have one in district that just came to us from California. Love my California people. They've held her back a year in California because she didn't go to school.
Oh, okay.
Basically, you know, she missed so many days that they couldn't legally put her in the next grade. So when mother moved back to Texas, she put her in the grade she thought she needed to be in. Well, we finally got the records from California after I talked to 4 different schools, and come to find out she needed to be in 5th grade because she never completed 5th grade.
Oh. And she's currently in 6th grade.
Yeah, we moved her back to 5th grade. Mother wasn't real happy, but we
She did get credit for the 5th grade year.
so, but now mother wants her, she really wants her to have an IEP, but we looking at her absences from California says we really can't. So mom the other day took her to a psychologist who wrote me this note that says she needs help. Well,
Did it have an L in it or was it just hip?
I said, well, did he do any testing? Did he evaluate her? Well, no, he just said she needs help. I need an IEP. Man, we've already explained this to, and we've had the phone calls. I wrote out the notes with the other teacher. If you brought her to school every day, maybe in January we can look at it, but now she wants a 504 plan.
So I'll back up just a little bit to the IEP. So if a parent requests, as what she was requesting was a special education evaluation,
Which, by the way, she already had in California, didn't qualify.
she had the eval and didn't qualify, I would for sure be clear on what my SPED department wants me to do. Because we have some requirements in special education, like if a parent requests in writing, we have to respond in writing within 15 school days, the prior written notice, which has 7 components, right? If a parent requests verbally, best practice is to get them to put it in writing. Basically what I'm saying is we should respond in writing, but that would all come from SPED, right? And we have to give them lots of forms whenever we deny them an evaluation. As far as the absences, yes, that can be an exclusionary factor. In the SPED world, we typically apply that exclusionary factor after or as a part of the evaluation, right? So it would be, I'm not saying unheard of, but less common to say, I see 45 absences, we're going to decline to evaluate. But if we do that, we're going to do it in writing. So your SPED director, and you're kind of, got a transition right now with your SPED director, right? I would just be clear on how they want you to handle that. It would be more likely that we would either, yes, evaluate, and then as a part of that evaluation say, yeah, she's struggling. We see all this evidence of struggle. However, there's this exclusionary factor of inadequate opportunity for education.
Well, so far in this school year, she's missed 12 days.
Mhm.
So it's like, okay, but we're on the same pattern that you were on in California.
Right.
And we talked with the parent, we sat down, we said, okay, we're gonna look at her through RTI.
Mhm.
So we're gonna start there, we're gonna, so we can go ahead and give her
Mhm.
her text-to-speech, that's all
And
we
that's
can-
the help that
That's
the
the help.
psychologist was asking for, basically.
And supplemental lines, we can do that, but as far as, giving her 504 accommodations or SPED accommodations, and I said, if he did evaluation, can we see that evaluation? Can I ask the doctor's permission for the evaluation? Because she's also working with a
Social worker.
social worker because she was on Medicaid and
Yeah.
this woman's going to give me a headache.
Well,
But now we don't know where she's living because the address we have is no longer valid, so we don't.
wow, lots of mobility there.
I'm gonna go Krista or.
Ultimately, 504 is, the first part of eligibility is a disability. And so one way I talk to parents about that is I understand your kiddo is struggling. What disability do you suspect? What disability did the doctor visit with you about? If you can bring it back to, of course, we are bound to evaluate for a disability if parent doesn't have evidence of a disability. But again, I think parents can think that they're entitled to something like 504 just because their kid struggles, or an IEP just because their kid struggles. But the first hoop to jump through is the identification of a disability, right? And absent from school a lot is not a disability, right?
Yeah.
So what does that look like if, and Dr. Mullins, you may know, if the parent can't,
Mhm.
get evaluated for a disability, do we then send it to the guide to evaluate?
I just wrote a note to
Okay.
talk to Melanie about that, because
Okay.
I don't know the answer.
Okay.
So I'll
No,
gonna
you
answer
go
a different
ahead.
question, not the question that you asked directly and you answered, but let me back up. So if a parent seeks a 504 evaluation, we do need to respond. And OCR has said, in a reasonable amount of time, let's just follow SPED timeline and let's respond within 15 school days. And we really should respond in writing, right? We don't have to have a prior written notice. We don't have to have all the components of a prior written notice, but we should not respond just verbally. And one of the main reasons is so that we can document, right? We want to document what we've done, and we have to provide data. So no, we're declining the request for a Section 504 evaluation based on. And then if the kid's performing very, very well, we could put all that data in there, passing grades, passing star, good attendance. Or if the kid has been absent a lot, we could also do that and then just, informally state that the student appears to be struggling due to extended absences. There's not a right way or a wrong way to do it. There's just that we need to do it, right? We need to respond in writing. So the parent educator guide that I first quoted from says that if there's a suspicion of the disability, and it sounds like in this case there's not, but if there is, then we as the district are bound to evaluate for it. So if it really does seem like this kid has ADHD and that parent is not getting that kid to a doctor, it really is up to evaluate for ADHD or help the parent get to the doctor to evaluate for ADHD. If it is clearly within the realm of SPED, yeah, I would talk to my SPED department. But that's because I see the kids struggle, right? I suspect this disability and a need for services. It just goes back to Child Fund. Just because a parent asked for an evaluation doesn't mean I suspect the kid has an evaluation.
So who sends the letter? Obviously, if it's a disability, like you were talking about, that would be the SPED department. But if it's a 504,
Mhm.
does our 504 person?
That's who I would have to do it, someone who knows the 504 world and paperwork. If a parent asks me, like verbally for a 504 eval, or a 504 plan, however they say it, or even an accommodation plan, I would try to talk to them enough so that I could get them down to what do you mean an accommodation plan? Then I would ask them to put it in writing. This is just me. You don't have to do it as a district, but I want to document that the parent asked and the date and all of that because I want to prove I responded in a timely way and then document all of my data.
But is there ever a situation where you would not have an evaluation?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So if a parent requested an evaluation, no one saw evidence of a difficulty, much less a disability, you could decline to evaluate.
So that doesn't happen in the meeting. You can say, I don't
Correct.
have enough information to
Teacher
have
input.
an evaluation.
I wouldn't ever say I don't have enough information to evaluate.
Or
I
there's
would
not
say the information we have,
The data
Good.
that we have reviewed indicates there is not a need for
And
an
then list it.
evaluation.
Yeah.
Right.
and list
So
it.
we
And it's
could
probably
say-
this kind of data.
The
Passing
grades,
grades.
the teacher input that I received.
Star scores.
Well, you're not
star
gathering
score.
teacher input. You're gathering data before you evaluate that you just happen to have access to.
That's
Now-
not, but that's not much.
Right, exactly. What parent has to say as well.
Okay.
And in my district, we decided, this is just me, we would rather have the conversation about why the kid wasn't found eligible as opposed to why we chose not to evaluate.
Right.
So basically, if a parent requested an evaluation, I had one kid that, oh my gosh, stellar kid, gifted academically, behaviorally, all of that. What it came down to was parent wanted a copy of class notes. And so she insisted the kid, I needed a copy of class notes for this disability from this doctor, big brain. And we went ahead and evaluated. And the kid, we went through we were jumping through hoops. We knew the kid would not be found eligible for, but the conversation with this parent was easier to be had around, look at all this data. We did the evaluation as you requested. Kiddo has no need for any accommodations, as opposed to what can be a continuing argument, if you will, about why we won't just evaluate. So that's a question to kind of settle in your district or campus. But there is no requirement under SPED or 504 to honor every parent's evaluation request. We're supposed to respond, and we're supposed to respond with data, yes or no. But we have to be careful not to go ahead and conduct the evaluation on our own. We wouldn't want to gather everything we would normally get in a 504 eval, have the one person look at it and go, this kid doesn't need 504, and then respond to the parent. Because then we've basically violated 504 because we haven't given the kid the process. Right? Part of the process is this committee of knowledgeable people coming together, looking at all the data, asking all the questions. But we can also just decline an evaluation based on the little bit of data that we have. And one place I can draw a line, if you're asking, well, what data do we use then if we can't use all this? I think historical data, stuff we're going back to look over time at STAR scores and attendance over years past, things like that. I mean, that clearly would be part of a 504 evaluation.
And if we can
In my
prove,
mind.
that the student has received good tier 1 instruction.
Yes.
That's
and
data,
and-
absolutely.
Right,
Yeah.
and there are no gaps in learning due
Yeah.
to academic, or due to attendance,
Mhm.
then those are easy, quick
And you
ones.
probably have, I think almost a request based on academic performance is probably the easiest to respond to because that's the data you have. We are constantly doing common assessments and exit tickets and bench. We have lots of learning data on kids. So I think that's probably the easiest one to
hey.
respond to.
Ms. Perkins, so, I just got this email.
Okay.
Just talked with mom, interested in having him tested, maybe struggling with a disability that hasn't been discovered, specifically in the area of math. He currently qualifies for 504 services due to dysgraphia. He's always struggled in math. So, so with this, mom's asking for, I guess, speds.
It sounds like a sped eval.
Yeah, but if she was, let's start if it was just 504, and mom says this kid has dysgraphia, okay, so I can ask for, okay, can you send me what you have on
Are you willing to share?
share?
And
Okay.
go ahead and get consent for a 504 evaluation. I'm a talker. If you can't tell, I have lots of words. And so I don't mind at all having that conversation with parents. Like, I'm going to keep pulling at this thing. Like, what exactly are you asking for? Because it's confusing. The process for 504 and the process for SPED, those are very similar processes. Some parents are very averse to SPED, and I just want to be clear what the parent's asking for. So it wouldn't bother me at all to have a further conversation with the parent to be clear what she's asking for, and lay out the two paths, right? If learning is the suspected area of difficulty, yeah, I'm more likely to just help mom understand that's probably a special education evaluation, and then follow your referral process for that.
This is not this sort of related. Do we as a district test for dyscalculia? I know we,
And
not
dyscalculia.
Dyscalculia too.
dyscal- for math.
Oh,
We do as
the
a district?
dialects, I'm sure.
I thought that had to be resourced out.
Yeah, because I know it
I
was
don't think we do. for
dyslexia,
dysgraphia.
dysgraphia, but not dyscalculia.
Because at one time we didn't
Yes.
recognize
Oh,
it.
we do.
Yes.
Calcula.
For math.
I know.
Okay.
I'll
I was
address
just
that
curious.
like state and federal, if you don't mind. I don't know exactly what your policy is. So dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia are the math, reading, and writing disabilities that were basically named over in Europe. Like they came from really England first and some other European countries. They're well researched over there. Teachers have certifications both to treat students with those conditions and to evaluate. And here in America, we have the IDEA born in 1975, and we have SLDs, right? So we have SLD in math calc, math problem solving, written expression, and then the 4 basically that we have in reading, including dyslexia. So basically, dyscalculia eval would be swallowed up in an SLD math calc eval, right? So dyscalculia, if a parent requested it again, I would have that conversation. How do you see this difficulty in math manifesting? And dyscalculia is typically a difficulty subitizing, so like just looking at a set of dots and knowing whether those dots, might be 5 or 500, right? That's looking more like dyscalculia, like very quickly, which is more, and looking at 2 sets of dots. It is the very basics of math, right? Like just giving a kid a pile of teddy bears and saying, show me 10. And that kid understanding they can count to 10 and represent 10 in a set. So if I evaluated and found a kid eligible with a specific learning disability, either in math calculation or math problem solving, that would, if you will, swallow up that dyscalculia, right? So very often in districts in Texas, when a parent requests a dyscalculia eval, we talk to them about what dyscalculia is. Researchers don't agree on a definition, because if you think about our definitions in America, they come from our IDEA law. They come from our SPED and our state law. And so different researchers call dyscalculia different things. And so typically we explain that I think what you're asking for is a math disability evaluation, and that's what we seek consent for. Nothing wrong. The OSEP sent a letter, 2008 maybe, that said basically don't be afraid to say dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia. They call it the don't be afraid to say law, but nothing requires us to use those terms either. That was more than you were asking
A
for.
question before you go on. We're elementary. A lot of times we don't get parent letters from 504. We'll just get a doctor's note like dropped off, and it'll say the student's ADHD, they need 504 accommodations. Should we treat that as a parent request at that moment? Because that's all we'll get.
We still have to get consent. So
Yeah.
yes, we can assume it's parent request,
Okay.
but we're still going to have to seek written consent from a parent.
Right.
And then I would always, I'm a talker, so I would, hey parent, I noticed you dropped this off, so we're going to have consent. I just want to
Yeah.
clarify that you're seeking a 504 evaluation. And yes, usually
Okay. Yeah.
that's exactly what they're
That's usually
asking for.
for 504 what we get. We don't usually get emails or things like that. We'll just get something dropped off and it's put in our box. And it's,
Yep, I would treat it as a
Because
child
we
find
have a Dr.
trigger.
Big Brain here in
Yeah.
town that loves to.
You got one of those
Yeah,
too?
and everybody's ADHD or ODD or something.
Anxiety.
Yes,
anxiety.
anxiety, general anxiety disorder, we have a lot of that.
Depression.
ODD.
Yeah.
ODD.
All the Ds.
All the Ds.
disabilities. So we get our data, and we would get as much data as we possibly could, including Dr. Big Brain's evaluation that he did, and then we conduct the meeting. And I think it's very, very helpful if we have an agenda. Do y'all already have an agenda that you
Yes,
use? You might add to it, I cannot remember the number of the bill, but do you remember working its way through our legislative session? Was this requirement for any exit plans, like in an emergency or an emergency drill, a kiddo under 504 or SPED has to have a plan? Not in their 504, although frankly I think I would put it there, but in the emergency operations plan, for lack of a better word. It's kind of outside of my realm. When it started, our legislators said it definitely
I don't know.
We
Yeah.
know
needs to be in the
that.
504 plan.
I know where.
Do you listen to TASB webinars? Okay, so there was one yesterday. I was in a district and got to listen to it, and they did talk about it, and I'm imagining the slide they had up, and I just don't remember the numbers. But, that's something we should think about. So that was my reference to you. Maybe go
Okay,
back and
so-
find that.
What you're saying is if a student is 504 and you recommend SPED or vice versa.
No, if they need either one, 504 or SPED, but they need, we typically think of a kid as needing, in an emergency situation, help getting out of the building.
Okay,
So if their disability manifests in a way where they might need support, and that's an intellectual, a lot of this falls in SPED, right? A kid with an intellectual
Okay.
disability, maybe with autism, the lights, the sirens, the whatever's going on
Yeah, we
that's
had a drill
concerning.
the other day and one of ours had a meltdown.
And for the drills as well. If you've got a kid that can't ambulate and they need help getting out of the building, we've got to practice all that in the drill. I would put it in the 504 plan. I would put training for getting out of the building in the plan, so everybody that year knows how to get the kid out of the building. But that bill requires us as a district to also put that information in. There's an acronym, I apologize, it's outside of my
Okay.
wheelhouse, but it's whatever your district's emergency operating kind of plan is.
Okay.
Well, mine is just like,
I don't think we have any
I don't think we
504s.
well, not that they're physically unable to leave a building. We do have a law that cannot even attend a pep rally because of their signage.
Okay.
So for those students that we have on a list for an alternate location during a pep rally because they cannot handle
The sensory.
the noise or the crowded
That's how they
exposure, whatever.
Mhm.
Do we have to have one of those for those students?
That's what Hope does.
So I would send
Okay.
you back to the bill to read it. Because it didn't land in 504, it's not something I kept up with, that's what I'm saying.
What was the bill?
I don't remember. I apologize. It would have to be somebody in emergency operations that would know about it. Superintendents, assistant superintendents, maybe. For a minute, it looked like they wanted it in the IEPs and the 504 plans, and that's what perked my ears up to it. And I hung on to it for as long as the legislators left it there. But when it went back to committee, they took it out of the plan. So that's my long way of saying I don't know. I did not keep up with that.
So, okay, what you just said was they considered it, it was part of a part of a bill, but they took it into that, taking it out.
They altered the bills. You know how the Senate.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it went back and forth. The final bill does not say that emergency plan has to be in the IEP and the 504 plan.
Okay,
It says it has to be in either the district or the campus emergency plan.
I got it.
But what made me think about it was the agenda. Like, I think
Okay.
maybe we need to add it to our agenda to be sure it's on somebody's radar.
Right, and
To
I
talk
think it
about.
must be because Marie just mentioned that there's a special ed student at her campus that it was in there. She heard them
I heard
talking about it.
discussion with their team, when we have a drill, this is how we have to get Chloe out and yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
Yeah, we have one with our student,
And I think a wheelchair is automatically brought down or something.
Perfect.
yeah.
And you really want all of that. Every time you have a drill and it's successful or unsuccessful, you really want to document that. Have the teacher understand that you may not be directly documenting it. That's really, really helpful. Should anything go awry, and I'm thinking even kids with EpiPens, kids with severe allergies, like training, we want to document it. So I would talk at the table about what training would be required. It gives parent the opportunity to say, this is a life-threatening allergy, or this isn't really that big of a deal. You know what I'm saying? Like, we all need to know how threatening this is. And then if there's training required, and probably your nurse is, I'm looking at my time, sorry. Your nurse is best equipped to look at that healthcare plan and decide what training is required. Maybe the whole staff needs training in how to execute that EpiPen or whatever. But for sure, document when you have the training.
I've got another meeting.
Yes, no, I understand. We're going to have all the fun.
I know you
We're
are.
being recorded, y'all. We cannot finish early. Just so you know. So what I have linked to here is a loose agenda. Maybe I still have it linked. I don't know. I may have broken the link. I can't remember because it's an old agenda and I don't want to put out stuff that's old. But I think it's helpful to put roles in the agenda. So that's just a thought, especially if you feel like you get Stacy's in the meeting that just talk and talk and talk, right? You can even put on the staff members, a little time constraint there, just so Stacy knows. We're going to share for 5 minutes and then we're going to pass it to the next person. But also I think it's helpful for everybody to know that, this part of the meeting isn't their job or it is their job. We always had our administrators making the introductions. We really wanted to establish for parents that was the district meeting. I know our parents might feel like this is my kid's meeting and it is about your kid. But the responsibility to have the meeting is not on the kid and it's not on the parent, it's on the district. And ultimately, you're responsible for holding the meeting and maintaining the documentation and all of that. And so I really liked starting with our administrator, making the introductions and then sharing the agenda with everybody at the table so everybody knew where they were and what was coming next. Invite parents to share first. This is not in any documentation, it's just in my head because I've been the parent that comes in with those things right here on the top of my head. And I can't think about anything or focus on anything until I say my piece, right? It can be helpful, not saying you have to, but it can be helpful to let parents.
That's one thing I forget is, because I'll go straight into just myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes we as parents hang on to that information, like for months or even all year. Like, because we know, okay, but they're going to have their meeting, and so I'll share that then. And I just think it can be helpful. It isn't, you don't have to do it that way. I'm really cautious about this one lately. We need to be sure that if this is up for committee discussion, so whatever piece of data, if we're holding a report card or a DMAC history on the kids' STAR scores, everybody has access to that. Just because it's in the folder doesn't make it a part of that committee meeting. So you're either projecting so everybody in the room can see it, everybody has a copy, or you're reading out loud. But I don't know, my initial thought when I would look at these big CUME folders was, oh, this is all of the 504 data. But really, once I started sitting in meetings, it wasn't. Because while the STAR records for the past 5 years were in there, nobody said anything about them. And unless the data is considered by the whole committee, it really wasn't a part of the meeting. So you can't really list it as data that's considered. Does that make sense? Unless everybody has access to it.
So real quick, if so, Success Ed, we
Yeah.
have all the boxes.
Yeah.
And we put information in those boxes, so like STAR scores, I'm 8th grade, so 7th grade STAR scores were this. And this student was exited from dyslexia in the 5th grade.
Yeah.
And we verbally say that, and we're hitting each box of what we have in there. That's considered sharing it with the committee, correct? Or like
Yes.
grades. These are the students' current grades.
Yeah.
In Texas history, they are US history, they have this, and ELAR, they have that. That's what you're saying. 'Cause we
Yeah.
don't always project.
Yeah.
I mean, or
Right.
Talk about it.
But just, yes, but just imagine, like, you've got grade reports, but you don't talk about them. Like, you yourself personally are looking at the grade report and you say, oh, he's passing everything. But in the meeting, nobody says anything about grades.
Oh, yeah, I do.
I do.
I'm just saying,
Right.
we wouldn't then call it a data point that we collected and make committee decisions about, right? So if it's in the folder and it's considered a piece of data that contributed to the meeting, we just all have to have access to that information, however you share it.
and like I had a student last week that has ulcerative colitis.
Colitis.
I'm not saying that correct, but and so we had our annual review, our initial last year. And so we didn't really discuss STAR scores. We didn't discuss grades. So
Yeah.
in there I put grade STAR scores were not discussed at this meeting because it didn't pertain to.
What
Her-
your meeting,
right.
disability.
Okay.
So that's, even though it's a data point that I would use for most meetings, I don't, and I document it in the spot where it says that. That's okay.
Yeah, I would just caution against sliding those STAR scores in there, checking the box that you talked about STAR scores when really you didn't talk about it at all. You collected them, but didn't share that data with anybody.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what
That
I would,
makes-
yeah, that's what I would be cautious about.
My thing is like that box where it says like the aptitude and achievement test. We don't have anything.
Yeah. We
Right.
don't.
have nothing.
So these are just examples, and the reason, Dave Richards and Jose Martin created these forums a gazillion years ago, and what I heard them say was they created them so that a trained monkey could do them. I was immediately offended because I was sitting in that meeting trying to learn how to use these forms. But what they're saying is they wanted to save you time and make everything that could be a checkbox and everything that could be a consideration right in front of you. That doesn't mean you're bound to check any of the boxes, right? We could develop a 504 plan and write out our meeting like on a blank piece of notebook paper, right? There's no particular form that's required. So don't feel like you have to check everything or gather everything. If you have no aptitude and achievement tests, you just don't. If a kid was ever in SPED, you probably have those. Or if a kid was ever evaluated, even in 504 back in the day for dyslexia, you have those. Not every kid's going to have them, and that's okay.
But
And
if
like
we
you
don't
said-
have it, we say that we don't have
Yeah,
it. Like,
yeah,
aptitude,
yeah.
achievement
Or just don't check
I
it.
always just
We're
put
not-
aptitude and achievement tests were not considered at this time.
Yeah, I just don't check it. I mean, I just check the boxes of the information we have, and I left the other boxes unchecked.
Can you explain what are mitigating measures? I have no
Yeah,
clue.
yeah.
20 years in education, I don't know what.
Yeah,
those
we're
are.
going to talk about mitigating measures. So
Okay.
in
Sorry if I'm just.
2008 or 2016, the Office for Civil Rights put into effect this mitigating measures rule. And so we actually do need to talk about mitigating measures. And I think we're getting pretty close.
Okay.
I just wanted to show that
Something outside, like medicine.
while we were talking about
So
data.
I just put that in the notes, because usually the parents like, well, they're on a bill of fire, or they're on So I just put it out
See,
there.
I just put the medication that the student is taking, or if they're receiving any type of psychological,
For mitigating measures,
I mean, 'cause
or do you put that in parent notes?
I usually put
I
in mitigating
mitigating
measures.
measures. Like, that's what I write down. I write if the student is attending psychological services outside of school, if they're taking any type of medications for either their depression, anxiety, or ADHD, that's what I put there.
So when my kid.
No, those could all be mitigating measures. We're gonna talk in depth about
Sorry.
mitigating measures. Don't be
We're
sorry.
joking.
No, I would rather come and answer your questions than just tell you what I know, because that's not helpful at all. It's more important that your questions get answered. But I think the way to mitigating measures is through this slide first. So this is about eligibility, and y'all, there are more outcomes to an evaluation meeting than you might realize. At least that was true for me. I thought we were gonna meet to evaluate a kiddo, and only one of two things was gonna happen, and there are so many more options. I bet you've noticed in Success Ed, there's actually lots of options. So the first three questions are pretty easy. I bet you could recite them in your sleep. Does the kid have a physical or mental impairment? I use the word impairment because that's what the law, the regulation uses. It's not a disability yet, unless the kid's found eligible. It's an impairment. We all have impairments. But does it rise to the level of disability? That's what we're trying to decide. We should be able to name it as a committee. And then, does it affect one or more major life activities? And then, does it substantially limit that major life activity, right? So these are the questions we need to get committee consensus on. And then the one thing we can't do when we're answering those questions is consider mitigating measures. And mitigating measures are a lot of the things that you named, anything that helps the kid manage their impairment or their disability. So dyslexia therapy or dyslexia instruction, it's a mitigating measure. It rewires the brain. Counseling is a mitigating measure. Medication, mitigating measure. Strategies that have been taught, mitigating measure. There are lots of things that a kiddo might have received to help them manage their disability that counts as a mitigating measure. Eyeglasses, right? There are some accommodations that are mitigating measures. And so what we have to imagine as a committee is this kid with none of the supports that are considered mitigating measures. It's why a kid that had dyslexia in 3rd grade is still eligible, potentially in 504, as a senior. Because when we answer these questions, we have to imagine the kid with no dyslexia instruction, right? So we answer all these questions pretending they don't have access to any of these mitigating measures. And sometimes we've never seen the kid like that, right? We've never seen a kid without his meds. We've never seen the kid before the 5 or however many years of counseling. And if the committee answers these questions with a yes, then the kid is eligible, at least technically, right? So technically eligible is one of the things we need to talk about. But the last question is, does the kid need 504 services or accommodations to basically not be discriminated against? That's what the rest of that question means. Now we get to apply all those mitigating measures, right? So now when I ask what plan my kid with dyslexia needs, what am I going to write down on that plan? Now I get to think about that kid and how good of a reader they are now. And they might not need anything from us. The kid with ADHD meds might not need anything from us. Technically, are they eligible under 504? Yes, because of the way we answered these questions with no mitigating measures applied. And the committee needs to understand that, right? And then what plan do they need? Well, maybe nothing. There might not be one single thing they need from us to not discriminate against. So that's where we're really splitting the hair between, I know it could help you, but are you going to be discriminated against if I don't give you that copy of class notes?
We had, I had a problem before, I think a couple of weeks ago, about a student that has anxiety and depression or something along the lines. And all they wanted was to wear noise cancellation earplugs. So, I mean, we looked at the teacher input, they were doing fine in the classroom, they were not providing any accommodations whatsoever. They didn't believe they needed any accommodations for them to be successful. It's just the parent wanted the student to use those noise cancellation earplugs. And like you said, we did answer, those disability or questions that yes, but then quickly that she did not qualify for 504 services.
So you would have never gotten to this question. You would have stopped right here because you had data that said there's no substantial limitation to a major life activity. That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay, because what we came to the conclusion ahead, and again, we invited the nurse in that one because the child had an undecided name. And it was the principal, well, the assistant principal, the teacher, the parent, child, the nurse, myself. And we just decided that if we could just email the teachers and allow them to use those noise cancellation earplugs after the instruction, there's really no need for any other accommodations.
Right. I would encourage you to not even think about this question as a committee. And I understand it's what committees do. We start thinking, because we're teachers, what does this kid need? What is the parent asking for? Or in what way can we support the kid? That is not the question to lead with. We really have to work through all these other questions, right? So let's take that particular kid. The committee should go through all of these, not asking, does the kid need noise canceling headphones, but how are we going to answer these? Do we have any data that says, we know the kid has anxiety and whatever else the kid came identified with? Yeah, so that one's pretty easy.
1 and 2.
And so those two, yeah, pretty easy because they're answered basically from a medical provider. And when he talks like a medical provider, I'm going to listen to him. It's when he talks like a teacher that I'm a little suspicious. When the doctor starts telling me what I need to do as a teacher. But does there seem to be a substantial limitation to a major life activity? You know, that's going to vary. The way a committee answers that is going to vary based on the people in the committee and, frankly, campus to campus even. Because think about the supports that are automatically embedded in various classrooms at various campuses with different administrators. I was the lovey-dovey teacher, and I'm just going to stroke that shoulder and that arm and make you feel better, and if you need to cry, you just cry. Okay, I taught with somebody that was like, suck it up, buttercup. And so it really depends on what that kid needs and is how helpful that is to the kid. So the kid that has me as the teacher, I wasn't great about routines because we were just going to all come in and have a good day. And it doesn't matter where you turn your paper in, Miss Perkins will find it, right? But I taught with a teacher that was like, everything was routine and regimented. Kids with autism did great in her class. Kids with ADHD did great in her class. Kids with some emotional needs did great with me, right? So it just depends on the environment the kid is in. And we have to think about that when we answer this particular question. And I would try real hard not to let my committee get ahead of this question. It's the wrong thing to do to say, maybe, but I can't think of what the kid would need. Maybe, but can't we just give the kid the accommodation without finding them eligible? Because here's what OCR has said through court cases. They've said if you don't give the kid eligibility, you're robbing them of all the things they're entitled to. They're entitled to non-discrimination, to a manifestation determination review if it comes to it. Parents have right to a certain grievance process. And all of that is their right if we answer a certain way to these questions, regardless of whether they need this accommodation or not.
Okay, so for our number 3, if we put no there, do we have to?
You're done.
We don't have to write the reason why?
I'll show you. I'll go ahead and show you that screen. I do think you should write the reason why. I would absolutely justify every decision made by the committee. But it would be data. Like it wouldn't be the words I came up with. It would be the data to support it. Does that make sense?
I mean, we upload into Success Ed all the teacher input in there.
These are snips from forms, and the forms might look a little different from yours, but basically this is Success Ed before it was in Success Ed when it was a paper form. So you should have, everything in italics here is meant to help you as you're guiding the meeting. And you see that there's no automatic eligibility. I'm backing up in just a minute because I remembered we should probably talk about this. But do you see how it says in virtually every case, a kid with certain conditions, diabetes, epilepsy, bipolar, will probably be eligible. That's a caution to me as the 504 leader. We're really got to think about this before this committee decides this kiddo is not eligible, right? But there's also no automatic eligibility. And so it tells us right here that if we answer yes, the kid does have an impairment, physical or mental, we name it, right? So that question we decided was pretty easy based on
Yes.
the doctor, and then which major life activities impacted. Here's a list. It's not exhaustive. We can think up some other major life activity. That wasn't the hard question.
Just one looking up.
This helps us understand what substantially limits means.
Okay.
It used to mean severely restricts, basically. And OCR came out and said, you know what, lower that threshold a little bit. And frankly, tie goes to eligibility. If we are in a meeting and we just can't decide if this kid is substantially limited or not, and it's all based on data, then you give the kid eligibility. That's what all of this says in italics. That was what the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act was all about. More kids should be eligible under 504. And then, yeah, you need to justify. It says explain why the student's not substantially limited. And that's where you put data. Student manages to get to class on time, has no emotional breakdowns, is not absent or has zero absence, however you want to word it, but you need to support it with data right here.
So my question, would a tie sound something like, I have a kid with asthma? We're good right now, but when spring comes and everything flares up and they're 3 days in the hospital, can we look into the future like that and be like, in case this kid has to go into
I would look at the past instead.
and he's been in the.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, historically, yes, you should
Historically.
see, and that may be an episodic impairment, which is fine.
Okay.
I had a kid, a first grader once, that was undergoing cancer treatments. Well, during the week she didn't have a treatment, did pretty good. But the weeks that she did have a treatment following, definitely 504 eligible. So yes, I wouldn't project forward and keep any what if accommodations or what if plans, but yeah, you can absolutely use historical data.
Okay.
I will.
Sorry, I feel like we're just like,
Sorry.
No, that really was what this is all about.
okay, ADHD, which
Yeah.
is the majority of,
Junior high.
yes, that we see, and the mitigating measure with ADHD.
Yep.
Is there, and there's a little blurb in the first question about ADHD.
Mhm.
And I know there's no automatic
Right.
admissions, but most of the time, is a student with ADHD going to qualify for a 504, but not necessarily a plan?
It depends. So I hope parent is willing to share whether a student is taking medication. So are we talking about a kid that's medicated or not?
Yes, but the parents, it's like if they forget to take their
Yes.
medication, or if they don't take it anymore, or
So basically, as we answer these questions, they probably are going to be found eligible for protections under 504. But then when we answer the last question, remember we had to imagine the kid in front of us on medication, and he might not be eligible for a plan. So we have to explain to parents, your kid is technically eligible. They have a right to a manifestation determination review, should they need one. They have a right to all these procedures we're giving you on this double-sided 2 pieces of paper. And they have a right to not be discriminated against. And should they need a plan in the future, they have a right to a plan. They're also probably entitled to a triennial and every 3-year at least reeval, right? So the kid basically has a right. This is all decided by court cases. OCR won't answer us and tell us exactly what they have a right to, but we think they have a right to everything except the plan, right? But I didn't know that when I first came to 504. You may not have known that until today, and I know our parents don't know that. They just think, the doctor said my kid has ADHD, I'm gonna need some stuff, and they
well,
start
and that's what
listing.
I found it a way around that, especially with ADHD, is hey, you're eligible to qualify.
Right,
However, there is nothing in this teacher input that says that you need accommodations or a plan.
right. Current success equals what we're currently providing is working. And y'all, I would have more discussion probably around it than that. I would talk about the kinds of supports that all students have access to. I would talk about the emotional or behavior components to the kid's day, not just talk about grades, because the kid's education is about more than just grades. But ultimately, if that kid seems to be performing in all those areas commensurate with peers, then they're not entitled to a plan just because they have ADHD.
And that's why parents will ask for a copy of the notes.
Because
And
the parent wants to know.
because they're like, they do have
Yeah.
ADHD, and it's like, I'm not disputing that fact.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that says
Yeah.
they need those notes.
And even if they occasionally forget their homework or forget their, to do their assignments or turn their assignments in. Yeah, so do lots of junior high kids, right? So again, it's helpful to help parents understand this is just so we don't discriminate against the kid, and we don't have any indication that your student needs protection from discrimination.
Okay, so my question, on that. So let's say, yes, they do qualify for 504 services, and like you said, no, they do not qualify for a plan.
Okay.
So do we say, yes, they qualify, and then mark them as 504
Yeah, let's look at the,
students, but
let's look
not
at the
receiving
forms.
any accommodations in classroom or state assessment?
yeah, there's a box for that. So let's look at the form so we know which one to check. Because basically, we're filling out these forms in Success Ed because we're gonna lock them and bundle them and give them to
Yes.
parents. And so we're not, this is not our master. The form is not our master, right? But it's going to help us be compliant. So we wanna know what boxes to check or whatever. So this first box is where, yep, this kid was found eligible and they get a plan. That means we answered yes to all the questions, and yes, the kid needed a plan. So even that fourth question, yep, kid's eligible and they need a plan. And that italics right here talks you through all of that. Not the whole committee, but just you who's running the meeting. If the kid isn't found eligible or doesn't need a plan, you just explain why.
Okay, now if a student is found eligible and does not need a plan, do we still do a 504 meeting on a yearly basis?
So can I
Is there-
come back to that question?
Yes.
Okay, I want to come back to that question.
Can I answer that?
Mhm.
What Dr. Mullins is telling us is yes, they will have a, meeting every
If the
year.
kid is not eligible for
Oh,
504?
if they're
No,
not?
no, if
No.
they're eligible in 504, but they do not have a plan. That's
okay.
like, because we're good, like she was saying, like those students who have ADHD or those qualifications, they are eligible
Technically,
technically to be in 504, but
They-
not necessarily need
But do
a
they,
service plan because they're being successful in the classroom.
my question would be, look at testing. Do they need anything for testing? Because that's where Amy's
Right,
coming
but
in.
they're still being successful. Okay,
With
the
testing?
student is, like, you qualify for 504 services, I don't know if I'm not
not
explaining
services,
myself. Well, for
just
504
eligibility. You're technically eligible.
for 504 due to ADHD or your anxiety or what have you. But you're being very successful in the classroom, even though the parent is saying, I want my child to receive 504 services. The student is being very successful in the classroom. There's no need for any state assessment either, accommodations.
Okay.
So if we say, yes, they technically do qualify for 504 and they can be protected under 504, but they do not need a plan.
You're going to default, like she said, back to your district policy, but it does tell you here what the kiddo is eligible for, and at a minimum, they're eligible for a triennial reevaluation. Some districts, I would say most districts choose to do that evaluation every year, and so probably it's going to be every year, but that is something to ask Dr. Mullins about for sure.
It's just that I'm thinking that I did my girl, hers might not be, okay, because she did have the qualifying factor, but we did not place her in the 504 because she
Would it
was
be-
being very successful.
Would it be best practice to then, on something like that, bring the student in and say, hey, you have SATs coming up this year, do we need to look at testing accommodations? You don't have a plan for classroom, but testing accommodations.
So
But
we as the
SAT
committee answer all those questions.
Okay.
Hopefully the student is a part of the committee,
Yes.
but we don't make SAT accommodation plans. We make instructional accommodation plans. And of course, a part of our instruction is STAR accommodations, right? And we do think about AP tests and things like that. College happens in the future. SAT, ACT, even TSIA. We could talk about that in our plan, but it's not like it's a separate and a part of the accommodations.
Right,
Yeah, but
but I mean, what Amy is saying
Yeah.
is,
Yeah, well, my thing is like for this specific student that I did not put her in a 504 plan. Parent themselves said she does not need anything academically. She just needs to wear those noise cancellation earplugs. That's it. There was no other
But that could be
reason.
part of our plan though.
But she technically, she did meet the qualifying conditions.
Right.
But
So if
there's
she,
no classroom accommodation, so I'm thinking, should I have placed her
well,
as a 504?
here's what it sounds,
Identify her as a 504, even though she didn't need any academic.
right, we're not talking about academic though, we're thinking the whole school day.
Right.
So it sounds like to me, she was found technically eligible because you answered
Right,
yes to
yes.
those first 3 questions.
Yes.
And then when you got to the 4th question, the committee couldn't think of anything that she needed except these earplugs, but like you
Correct.
said, that is an accommodation. So it sounds like the committee wanted her to have those earbuds because it went out as an email. She's not eligible, but you should let her have the earbuds. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that is a potential 504 accommodation.
Okay.
And that one thing
Potentially.
becomes our plan.
Just that one thing.
Oh yeah, the one thing could become her plan. There's no yeah,
So
well, I guess
should I
one, where that would be a
so should
minimum.
I-
Yeah.
should
The
I
other
fix-
part to this story is this kid is a pain.
So should I go back and fix that?
Let
Or-
me think about it. Let's look through the next few slides and then maybe we visit further. And honestly, that may be a Dr. Mullins question if you want to untangle something that's tangled. But maybe as we go through these, you have a little more clarity and maybe you don't think it's tangled at all. Okay?
Sorry, Stacey.
No, don't be sorry. That's really why I'm here. Was your supervisor sat in on one of my trainings and said, I think it might clarify some things if you just gave a couple hours of that training. Because that literally is why I'm here. Okay, so we talked about technically eligible, and this walks you through if the kiddo is technically eligible, right? Answer to the yes questions. Answer yes to those first 3 questions, but not the last one. And then it tells you what they have access to. They have the manifestation determination if it comes to it. They get procedural safeguards. They get the periodic reeval. So whatever your district does, periodically a reeval, at least every 3 years. But you won't, this is going to walk you through. You're not creating a services plan at this time. And it tells you why kids' needs are already adequately being met. And we could reconvene if we develop a need, if we see a need develop and the kid needs an accommodation plan, right? The other option up here is not eligible. So it sounds like that's not what happened with this kid. Not eligible means with those first 3 questions, like we answered no, there's no disability, or there's no limitation, or there's no substantial limitation to a major life activity. So that's just no. This one right here, if you put a checkbox right there, it's because the kid is found eligible again. Like this was a reeval. And the kid is, nope. Yes, that was continuing eligibility, sorry. I think, I may have to go to the next slide to remember that. This is eligible, this is technically eligible as well, but for the reason, it's that the condition is in remission, my kid with cancer, right? The asthma that is not flaring up, the peanut allergy, I mean, there's just literally, it's not an active condition. It can go back to like mold in schools. The campus the kid is in right now, there's no harmful chemicals or mold or whatever, but there's something about the condition that is dormant. This is what happened with your kid. There's mitigating measures, it sounds like. There's something the kid has that is keeping that impairment from substantially limiting a major life activity. And I agree, that can be a fine line between are the earbuds the mitigating measure or the earbuds the accommodation the kid needs on the 504 plan?
It's kind of contradicting because, I mean, this person participates, the student participates in, she's in flags.
Oh,
Yes.
this is a different one.
Yeah, she's in the flags, that.
Color guard.
Thank you, thank you. I
Passion
was
guard.
trying to think of, she's in color guard.
Oh.
So we don't need to provide like an alternate location for Pepperellis or nothing like that. See, so I'm kinda like, why do you need them in the classroom, but then you're okay when you're surrounded by all that noise and you're participating and like that?
Yeah,
It's just-
it could be the environment, the academic environment. I don't know. I'm not questioning for sure. It sounds like you're questioning the decisions and how the
I'm
meeting
questioning
went,
the
but I'm
decision
not.
because I'm thinking I should have done the 504 eligibility and like you said, put the accommodation or the plan just that, the,
Headphones.
thing, no, it's gotta be earplugs.
Earplugs.
Oh, like the
Earplugs.
loop
The
one?
earplugs, there's noise cancellation
Oh, okay.
earplugs, nothing,
Phone ones.
nothing electronic,
Yeah.
nothing with Bluetooth.
Mhm.
So I'm questioning that And
Which,
if I
and just,
did
and
if I
just
did
to
that
go back to it, you could
correctly.
make that an RTI accommodation as well. So you, if you don't go back to 504.
But if we're looking at RTI, the kid's making A's and B's. She don't qualify for RTI.
But RTI also has
behavioral.
behavioral and,
Social emotional.
yeah, social
Okay,
emotional, so
because
that
she's
would be
not a
a,
behavior problem either.
Well,
But
no,
it could
it's
be a
behavioral,
social
the
emotional.
Anxiety. Did you say anxiety?
Anxiety,
So the behavior thing
depression.
goes back to RTI. That's her stressor.
Yeah.
So should I just put her in the RTI list then?
You could, and then
she can
figure
still
out what to do
receive.
about 504 with.
I honestly wouldn't wake up that can of worms anymore.
Okay.
I would leave her where you have her. Her plan is if she needs the headphone,
Well,
the
the
earbuds.
nurse sent out an email to all the teachers. I guess she was present in the meeting. The nurse said, I think it's just an email sending this to the teachers and just told
Say
the
they
parent
were-
to remind the next grade principal or the nurse of the school to allow her to wear those earplugs the following year, because she's already emailed that to the teachers.
And you said
for
she
this
was
school.
technically eligible,
Technically,
which means she's gonna come
eligible.
up for reevaluation and we can address
No,
it
here's
at the
the
reeval.
thing. If she is technically evaluated, okay, but we did not,
Give her a plan.
right, so there's no 5 by her name. That's my thing, if there's no 5
You're
labeling
talking about your
her-
SIS, in your PEM system, there's a
Yes.
five?
Yes.
Yeah, there should be.
She didn't identify her in the meeting as 504. Is what you're saying.
She's
I
eligible
guess,
just to
I
have a plan.
mean. I
Because
think
you're
that-
saying there's
well,
no 5 because y'all did not decide that she was eligible for 504, and now you're wondering
We're
if
eligible
she
for
should be.
504 services.
If-
What's
So,
her
yeah.
name? Who is it?
That's what
Yes.
matters. I think we gotta go back to the 504
Yeah.
thing.
So what you did, it sounds like if you answered yes to those first 3 questions,
I did
is the
answer
committee
yes.
found her technically eligible.
Technically,
So she is eligible as a
Yes.
student under 504. She's not
She
eligible
should
for
have
a
a
plan.
five.
She should be
Yes.
coded in PEMS
Okay,
Yeah.
so I
as
need, so I
504
need to go
eligible.
back and fix the PEMS form then.
There's a difference in 504 eligibility and an accommodation plan eligibility, if you want to call it that.
Okay.
Okay.
She should be coded in
See,
PEMS as
In
eligible
my,
for
in my
504.
brain, for whatever reason, I thought that yes, you're eligible, but you need a plan. If you're like an initial,
Mhm.
if you don't need a plan,
Mhm. Yeah.
why are you eligible? It's
Right.
not a deal.
It's,
That's what could happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's basically what,
Mhm.
okay.
well,
So I
and
need to go back and
Because
fix
she
it.
has, I guess, official diagnosis.
I mean,
I would
she
just go
brought,
ahead and,
she brought paperwork, so it just
go
kind
ahead
of
and
like,
fill out that PEMS form.
so I just need to fix the PIMS form and make sure
Yeah.
she is
It-
504,
if,
even though she doesn't have any
Right.
plan.
if
But
in
also-
fact, if in fact the committee found her substantially limited in a major life activity, I mean, you're gonna wanna review that, I mean,
We didn't find that.
okay,
We just answer yes to the questions 1 and 2.
okay, then she's, sorry. I thought you said that you've answered yes to all 3 of those questions.
No, not all 3.
Okay, then she's not
Because
eligible.
like that,
Yeah.
I mean.
Then she's not
well,
eligible.
If she just wanted those earplugs,
Mm-hmm.
do we just define?
Right, this is question 3, so if the committee said no, she's not substantially limited based on data, Then-
That's what they did.
then
That's what
we
they
then you're
did.
done.
We did that.
Hey,
but-
no, let's look at it. Let's sit down with her actual success ed stuff and go through what y'all did and what y'all talked about and see if that makes it clearer.
Yeah, okay, 'cause-
What's our student ID?
hold on, I'm going back to my notes so I can tell you the kid's name.
If she wasn't found eligible with the first 3 questions, don't code her in PEMS as
No, I
eligible.
mean,
Right.
she
Yeah.
is eligible due to the
Okay.
first 3 questions. It's just
First three,
that-
first
Whichever
two.
one's eligible.
I don't think I'm
Okay.
explaining myself.
No, that's
correctly.
okay. When you're looking at the paperwork, I bet it will be clear. That's a good idea. Okay, so this was initial eval. It took me a second. Initial eval, kid is found eligible. So there's the yes. And we decided the kiddo gets a plan. So that's an initial. The kid gets a plan. So we've actually talked through all of those. If the kid has mitigating measures like medication, this is where we're putting the little radio button, if it were really a digital form over there. So eligible under 504, we're coding them in PEMS as a 504 kid, but we're not actually giving them a plan. And that's all based on the answers to that 4th question, right? So if parents revoke consent for services, then we can't give them the plan, right? And so that's the option there. If the kid was already eligible under 504 and this is a reeval, then this is the box we check. If the kid's not eligible under 504, and frankly, that's not going to happen just a whole lot because, well, it just doesn't a lot. But if it does, maybe the kiddo is going to be served through SPED, which is actually this one, and the kid wouldn't be eligible under 504 anymore. Or if the committee just said, you know what, there's no longer a substantial limitation to a major life activity, they might not be found eligible anymore. This is when they're eligible under SPED, right? We're referring them to SPED. They've been found eligible. They're not going to be served through 504 and SPED at the same time. And then that's Gen Ed homebound. So if we're meeting to talk about a kiddo's eligibility for homebound, they happen to be served through 504, we use our 504 paperwork for the homebound meeting, right? We have to have a committee under homebound to determine, Gen Ed homebound, to determine a kid's eligible for that. So you use your 504 paperwork. So those are all the options you might be checking, right? Are there more questions about technical eligibility?
Now, if I'm looking at that paperwork, she answered yes to the first 3 questions and then answered no to the 4th.
Yeah, then the kid is technically eligible. If she answered yes to this 3rd question.
She did. Does the physical and mental impairment substantially limit a major life activities? The use of earplugs to minimize noise, which is the mitigating measure. So, but then, like I said, the 4th one, does she need 504 services in order for her educational needs to be met? They marked no.
She needs to be coded in PEEMS, is eligible for 504.
Okay, so I didn't need to go back and change that one.
That's in PEEMS. I would not make a change to her 504 paperwork.
Okay, so
Because
just,
that's what was made in the meeting.
so just,
In PEEMS, go back and mark her 504.
so I just need to send a new PINS one.
Mhm. Good job, team. Way to work through that one.
Woo, thank y'all.
Well, and I think too, because it's like, you know, we didn't really ever have a formal training, and you just, it's your other duty as assigned as a counselor, and so you're kind of just on your
Learn
own.
into it, and you just follow what success is.
So,
Yes.
just, well, don't I have to go in there and unlock that form and put 504 eligible and with no plan?
Yes.
Be sure if you make a change in Success Ed and paperwork has already gone home to parents and you're making a clerical error, you just be sure
To let them know?
parents get a copy. Oh, yeah. Whatever's locked and parents get a copy of doesn't need to be changed unless you give parents another copy and you tell them why it's being changed.
Okay.
And that would only be for clerical reasons because we shouldn't make changes outside of a meeting unless it's clerical.
You should just say no.
All right, Amy and Lisa asked me to share a little bit about just talking through accommodations. And I'll just share my heart a little bit, and I shared it in the meeting that they were in. There are some well-meaning teachers like me who retain accommodations that are not necessary. I'll just call it what it is, because what if the kid needs that thing? And it's maybe not so hard at the lower level when there's just a few accommodations or just a few students. But by the time that kid is in junior high or high school, and those accommodations have, built because they end up layering and we don't take anything off, and that junior high teacher, sees 125 kids a day, it's overwhelming. And so I think one thing we can really work on is helping our 504 committees really see whether there's a need for accommodation and exactly what that accommodation should be, like how should we word it. And so I'm using these almost as steps through the accommodation process. So let's just assume a kid's eligible and we know they need something. I would ask, what data do we have that shows there is a deficit in a grade level skill, right? We got to be able to articulate the skill. Your teachers are going to have to do this for you. You're not seeing the kid, unless it's a kid maybe with an emotional or behavior need, with a particular skill deficit. And then compare to their peers how they're performing in one part of that skill, and then how much of a deficit do they have, and then what support or service do we put in place. For example, if I see a kid that's not doing independent classwork, let's say that's the grade level skill. He's not struggling with all of classwork. he's struggling to complete it, right? He's starting it just fine. He's not disrupted. It's just the finishing of the work, right? So do you see how we're narrowing and narrowing? And now we've got to ask ourselves, okay, how much of a deficit is this thing? Because it may be that all the kids struggle to complete work because it's just maybe a teenager-y kind of problem. It's really helpful to have a data point. I understand that data can be hard to come by, but if you do an observation or you really visit with a teacher, you might be able to, look at the grade book and see missing assignments and come up with a data point. For example, this kid is completing independent classwork at the same rate as his peers, only about 20% of the time. When I look at the grade book, 80% of his assignments are late, right, or missing or whatever. And then there's lots of options, and we just got to talk through as our committee which of those options have been tried or we have some sort of reason to believe they'll work. Hopefully they've already been tried. So maybe we could give the kid extra time. Just bear in mind, they're going to run out of time if everyone's giving them extra time. We might reduce the assignment, or we might have some sort of structured reminder system in place, right? We want to be as precise as we can, so that's why I put the percentage in there. OCR kind of frowns upon, and attorneys frown upon assignments that are accommodations that are given like when needed, because then the teacher's discretion is kind of at stake there. Well, I don't know, is it needed, is it not? Or we're maybe asking the student to tell us when it's needed. So the purpose of that committee is to say, yeah, they need it or they don't. They either need it or they don't, and how much do they need? And there's no way around it. We're going to have some data to give us some parameters to that. Do they need 50% more time? Do they need more time on every assignment? Just homework assignments? Just class tests? What kind of assignments do they need the extra time on, and then how much extra time?
That is super helpful, narrowing it down like that.
Yeah, so we need to take out the as needed, because that's a big one that
Yeah.
I will
everybody
use
loves.
I will tell you the one caveat before we take it out of everything. If we are teaching a skill to a kid so that they can self-manage their behavior, in particular, default to kind of the emotional behavior piece, which is where y'all are experts and I'm not, there may be a time where the kid needs to figure out that they need the cool down corner or the walk around the hallway block, if you know what I mean? But we would have taught that skill. And now we're giving them access to it when they feel they need it. But leading up to that, I think the way it should be written in the plan, bless you, is that if a kid needs a break, they need a 5-minute break every hour. And maybe that's only for elementary because the 5-minute break every hour is built in at the high school level or something. But yeah, if needed, it's just hard to defend if there's a complaint that you didn't deliver an accommodation.
What if we're trying to help the kid with, like an autistic kid with social skills as needed for social interaction?
Yeah, I think you're probably better equipped to answer that. And I think my filter, because I don't live in a world of like behavior support and social skills support and stuff like that, but I think my filter would be, have I taught this skill? Or does the student already demonstrate they can do the skill? They already can do the thing. They just sometimes need support. And, it's even better if we can narrow it down to when, right? Like the passing period, which is maybe somewhat chaotic, or a non-preferred subject, right? Writing class. The more we can narrow it down, the less extraneous documentation we've got, right? Why are we documenting an extra time that we're providing a kid in math if the kid loves math and never needs extra time, right? If we can just narrow, and it comes back to data. If a teacher can give us some data, then that's helpful.
But we have click happy teachers.
I was one, I promise. I know. But then those same click happy teachers like me are asked to generate documentation at the end of the year because parent has complained to OCR, and the first thing OCR does is send out a form that says, give us all the documentation that you provided all the accommodations. Well, now I'm scrambling to find evidence that I wrote down somewhere that I provided this thing every day, and oh wait, I have 8 kids with 504 plans, and they all have at least 5 accommodations apiece. Every day, that's 40 pieces of documentation. It can become unreasonable. And the last 2 filters I would apply would be to ask, and this is the whole committee, this isn't just you, but ask ourselves as a committee, does all of this that we've worked through and narrowed down this accommodation need align with what I know about the disability? Remember, somebody at that table has to be knowledgeable of the evaluation data. So whoever knows about ADHD, maybe you. Does all of this align with what I know to be true about ADHD? And does it align with that substantially limited major life activity? Remember, because we all said they had a substantial limitation to learning or walking or breathing. That's going to help us make database decisions. It's also going to help us be very careful that we're not providing SPED support under 504. In other words, if we've got this ADHD kid that really needs reading and math support, and we're not stopping and thinking about that, might need a referral for SPED, right, for an SLD. And we can accidentally over accommodate in 504 instead of referring to SPED. We want to be careful not to do that.
And also that comes into play whenever it's like, say, a student with asthma and a teacher says they need oral admin. And so then you're reading that and you're like, oh, this is what the teacher says, but really the oral admin doesn't relate to the asthma.
Yes.
And so then it has to be maybe through RTI or maybe it is something bigger and it's SPED.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's easy to like go through that and think, okay, they need this, this, and this because teachers say that's what they're seeing, but it's unrelated to what they're 504 for.
Yeah, and I have another example here, but you made me think of something I really did want to get to, and thank you. Y'all are coming up with great questions for things that I wanted to cover anyway, and I appreciate you being willing to ask them. I share this with everyone who will listen, and I think you'll listen and hear me, on these state assessment accommodations, and I know that oral administration is a common one. So let's just look at that policy document real quick. I really advocate for these policy documents being in the 504, ARD meetings, LPACs, RTI meetings. You can print them and have them, or you can just pull them up. You know, these are living documents, so I try not to print. But I want to show you what it says to your your 504 committees right here. So for those committees, the decision is made by that committee, right? That's a 504 committee decision to give this kiddo an oral administration, but it has to be based on the eligibility criteria. And that's a hoop that our 504 committees can accidentally skip because they think, oh yeah, this kid has a disability and they're in 504, they get oral admin. Well, they might not, because just because you're in 504 doesn't give you access to any particular state assessment accommodation. You still have to look at the eligibility criteria, and we'll look at it in just a second. But that's true for all 11 locally approved designated supports. And of course, it has to be documented in the student's 504, the individual accommodation plan. So back to the kid with asthma. Let's say teacher says, yep, he needs an oral administration. We as a committee have to go under this pink stripe and look at all the eligibility criteria, and we've got to find evidence that this kid is eligible, not because he's in 504, but because he meets this. Well, first he has to routinely and effectively use it, and probably the teacher's already doing that, thank goodness. And then he's got to meet one of these, and you're not going to find asthma anywhere in here, and you're not going to find ADHD anywhere in here. Is the kid an emergent bilingual taking an English test? Nope, not this kid with asthma. Does this kid have limited vision? They added that one last year. Nope, not this kid. Does this kid have dyslexia or a related disorder? Not this kid. Well, then does this kid have documented evidence of a reading difficulty? And if you have that, the kid is eligible on the basis of the documented evidence of a reading difficulty, not because they're in 504, right? So now as a committee or as a district or a campus, we've got to know how much evidence do we need and how should it be documented and how much of a reading difficulty counts as a reading difficulty, right? And that is the harder thing to navigate, I think, in a 504 committee, because some of that, builds local policy into it, some guidance locally.
So the students who are receiving speech services, but they're not dyslexic, will that qualify them?
You're going to have to get the person in the meeting, whether it's 504 or SPED, the IEP meeting, to talk about their reading difficulties. Somebody's got to have, it's not the basis of their disability. So they're not eligible for an accommodation on STAR because they have a certain disability. It's because they meet this eligibility criteria. Could a kiddo with a speech impairment have a reading difficulty? Yeah, about 33% of the time, a kid with a speech impairment has a reading difficulty.
So
it
your
wouldn't
kid with
surprise
asthma that does have a reading disability, do we service them with oral admin through 504 because they meet that? Or do we need to have something else documented besides the asthma? Or do we service them through like RTI because they're having reading difficulties and say they're in reading enrichment.
Right. Let's look at what it says, and this will be the last thing we do because, we are down to our last 5 minutes. It says right here, and I'm just going to highlight the first word because I think when I highlight it blue, it's just harder to see the whole thing. So for the kid who's not in SPED or 504, right, they're served through RTI. There is a committee, whatever you call it on your campuses, doesn't have to be called any particular thing, but clearly TEA says it's a committee, it's not one person. So think about your asthma kid and whether there's a committee meeting to talk about his data. The appropriate team, again, whatever you call it, it's a campus level team, has to make this decision and document it according to district policy. So now we're going back to what does our district policy say about an RTI or MTSS team making STAR accommodation decisions. And note that decision is still based on the eligibility criteria. So let's say the kid with asthma is also served through RTI. We still have to go back to the pink stripe and read that eligibility criteria and be sure the kiddo meets it. And since we don't have state and federal policy around our committees, remember we have a properly constituted 504 or ARD committee, there's no properly constituted RTI committee, right? That's just local decision. TEA is giving us some guidance here. This accommodation of oral admin has to be based on a student's consistent academic struggle. So to me, that means some historical data. We've got to look back over time and see some consistency in the kiddo's struggle. And the student has to have had intensive instruction and remediation and has still got that documented evidence of a reading difficulty. Ultimately, if it were me, I would put all of that in a 504 AP, an individualized accommodation plan. However, nothing here says we would be violating this policy if we also had an RTI accommodation because the kid has a struggle. I'm assuming they're receiving some sort of pull-out intervention for their reading difficulty, right? Because it does look wonky when we've got a reading support in a 504 plan, right? So maybe your local folks want to keep it separate, and the reason they can is because of this guidance about the local policy driving how you document RTI.
So that could be, I think it's always easiest when there's one plan versus, several plans.
Mm-hmm.
But for a situation like that, I've been doing 2 plans.
Yeah.
But it's also local decision more than a 504.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would say definitely a local decision, and I have some hesitation both ways. I worry that I look like I violated child find if I put a reading accommodation in a kid with asthma's 504 plan. In other words, over time, it might look like, oh my goodness, we should have referred him for a SPED eval or a reading eval, right? So I do worry about that. However, for implementation, I'm like you, I like to have it all on one plan, and local policy is going to drive how we document the RTI plan. So I'm still circling back to it's going to be local policy. I think there's risk maybe either way. So it's just going to be up to your supervisors ultimately.
Well, I feel like the documentation comes through the RTI because that's where
That's the data.
documentation for the reading is, and
Right.
documentation for the asthma is in the 504.
Yeah.
That's what I do. If I have one that's in for physical, but we're struggling, I have to do it through RTI.
But then I say sometimes,
And I put
Bad
in the
words in my
50
head when
I
I-
put in the 504 notes, has accommodations through RTI
Yeah.
for reading and I put that in the notes.
Yeah.
But it's not needed
Yeah.
for diabetes or
Yeah.
whatever.
I think that's wise. And I think, you're going to report on the student's academic performance, even if they have asthma or epilepsy. You're going to document in the 504 meeting that the kid is struggling in reading, or at least that his grades are fill in the blank, and he obtained whatever score on STAR. Right? So you are touching on his academic performance,
right.
even if you're not documenting the state assessment accommodations there. I appreciate y'all so much.
We appreciate
I feel like we stressed you out today.
You did not stress me out at all. Thank you for stopping.